Florence, 1478. The Piazza della Signoria reeks of death. Bodies hang upside down from the Palazzo Vecchio, the seat of government, swaying in the summer heat. They've been there for weeks now, rotting, flesh blackening, flies swarming. And below them, life continues. Merchants haggle over fabric, children chase each other through the square, lovers meet in the shadows of decomposing corpses. A 9-year-old boy stands watching. He doesn't turn away. He's learning something the adults already know, but will never say out loud. Power doesn't care about your morals. That boy was Niccolò Machiavelli. Centuries later, the Pope would ban his book. The Church would call it written by the finger of Satan. A cardinal would declare him not a man, but the devil's messenger. And here's the twist that should terrify you. Machiavelli understood power better than almost anyone in history. He decoded every move, saw through every lie, mapped the entire game. And yet, he died poor, powerless, and forgotten. Which raises the question that'll haunt this entire story. Does understanding how power works actually give you power? Or does it just mean you get to watch yourself lose with perfect clarity? When you hear the biggest villain in history, you probably think of a king, a dictator, a serial killer. But the real answer? A writer, a philosopher, a man who never killed anyone himself. Yet his words still set blood on fire. 500 years later, Machiavelli wrote what everyone thinks, but nobody says. He wrote what your boss knows, but will never tell you. He wrote what successful people do, but never admit in interviews. And today, I'm going to tell you his complete story, from his rise to his fall, from his ideas to his failures. Because there's an irony in Machiavelli's life so brutal, it forces you to confront an uncomfortable truth. Maybe the people who see the game most clearly are the ones who lose it worst. Florence, 1469. Niccolò is born to Bernardo Machiavelli, a lawyer with impeccable connections and worthless bank accounts. You know this guy. Every family has one. Like that failed tech startup founder who still hands out business cards at Thanksgiving, talking about disrupting the industry while living in his parents' basement. Bernardo knew everyone, had coffee with politicians, networked with the elite. But his own financial situation? A disaster. The Machiavelli family had money, old money, respected money. But Bernardo was the broke branch on a wealthy tree. This is where Machiavelli's worldview starts forming. His father was skeptical about religion, never bought blind faith, always questioned authority. His mother, though, deeply devout, wrote religious poetry, composed hymns. So young Niccolò is watching two completely different universes collide at the dinner table every night. On one side, religion as a beautiful lie people tell themselves. On the other, religion as sacred truth that gives life meaning. A poor but intelligent father, wealthy but intellectually blind relatives. This contradiction, this split-screen childhood, would make him the most controversial philosopher the Western world had ever seen. Now let's talk about Florence itself. On paper, it was a republic, government by the people. They even had this fascinating system where every 2 months, new leaders were chosen by lottery, random selection. Imagine that in America. Every 2 months, new president, new Congress, chosen like a raffle drawing. The theory was brilliant. No single person stays in power long enough to become a tyrant. No dynasty controls the city. Beautiful idea, right? But reality was a circus. The Medici family, bankers who'd turned money into political machinery, had rigged the entire system. They controlled who got into the lottery pool. They installed their loyalists, their cronies, their yes-men. Florence was running a dictatorship under the branding of democracy. It's like a corporation that claims to value employee input, but promotes the CEO's golf buddies. And this wasn't unique to Florence. All of Italy operated this way. Corruption everywhere. Betrayal as standard business practice. Leaders who switched allegiances like Wall Street traders during a market crash. Mercenary soldiers, literal hired guns who'd fight for whoever paid more. Allies one morning, enemies by afternoon. Machiavelli watched all of this growing up. He absorbed it, studied it like a Princeton political science thesis playing out in real time on the streets. Then, when he was 9, something happened that branded itself into his consciousness forever. Some conspirators plotted against the Medici family. They failed, got caught. And what happened next, Machiavelli witnessed with his own eyes. The conspirators were hanged upside down from the Palazzo Vecchio and left there for weeks, rotting in public view as a message. A 9-year-old watching corpses decompose in the town square while people shop for groceries underneath. The stench spreading through the plaza, and everyone just continuing their lives, buying bread, conducting business, dating. This was Machiavelli's education. Not books, not professors. Corruption and brutality, betrayal and punishment. He learned the real rules of power before he learned to read Latin. Interestingly, we don't know much about Machiavelli's early 20s. History goes dark. The records disappear. But we do know that in 1494, when the Medici family got overthrown, Machiavelli suddenly landed a government job, started writing official documents, handling state papers, and within just a few years, promotions started rolling in like he'd unlocked some cheat code. First, he became head of the Second Chancery, one of Florence's 2 most important government departments. Then, Secretary of the Ten of War, the office managing foreign relations and military strategy. All of this happened when Machiavelli was just 28 years old. Today, people at 28 are still trying to figure out their LinkedIn headline. Machiavelli at 28 became Florence's top diplomat. And here's the eerie part. Nobody knows how. There's no paper trail, no documentation, no evidence of what he did to deserve these rapid promotions. Maybe he was just brilliant. Or maybe, and this is the disturbing possibility, maybe he was already playing the games he'd later write about. Maybe he was Machiavellian before the word existed. For the next decade, Machiavelli served as Florence's most important diplomat. But there was a structural problem he couldn't overcome. Florence was the weakest of Italy's major city-states. So no matter how talented Machiavelli was, he didn't have leverage. His diplomatic missions didn't produce miracles. It's like being the world's best salesperson at a company with a terrible product. Your skills can only compensate so much. Then, in 1512, everything collapsed. The Florentine Republic fell. The Medici family came roaring back to power, and they suspected, probably correctly, that Machiavelli had been working against them. So they arrested him, tortured him, then exiled him, banned from the city he'd served for 14 years. The man who'd been a top diplomat at 28 was now an unemployed nobody, forbidden from entering his hometown. But this is where Machiavelli's real story begins. Because sitting in exile in his small villa, reflecting on everything he'd witnessed, every betrayal, every power play, every brutal calculation, he wrote a book that would change history. He called it The Prince. And before we dive into what's inside that book, you need to understand why he wrote it. This wasn't some grand philosophical statement. It was a job application. He wrote it for Lorenzo de' Medici, the head of the same family that had tortured him. Machiavelli wanted back in. He wanted his career back. So he thought, I'll write down every secret I know, every dark truth about power, and gift it to the Medici. Maybe I'll impress them enough to get hired again. Remember this. It becomes devastatingly important later. Now, the prevailing philosophy of Machiavelli's time was simple and beautiful. A leader's greatness is measured by his goodness. A king's moral virtue determines his success. Good person equals good leader. This was the doctrine. What everyone believed, or at least what everyone said they believed in public. Machiavelli picked up that entire philosophy and threw it in the trash. He said, For a leader, only one thing matters: gaining power and keeping power. Being good isn't what makes you great. Building a great nation, that's greatness. And to build a great nation, you can't always afford to be good. Machiavelli completely divorced politics from ethics. He said, "This book isn't a manual for living a moral life. It's a manual for holding power, for being an effective leader." And because of this, Machiavelli rejected Christianity as a guide for political action, didn't put stock in traditional morals. More precisely, he argued that morality is fine for personal life, but you cannot be consistently moral and be an effective politician. The two are incompatible. Now here's the thing, Machiavelli could have softened this message. He could have said, "Power requires terrible things, therefore power itself is corrupting and bad." He could have moralized against the very tactics he described. If he'd framed it that way, the backlash would have been manageable. But he didn't. In this short book, Machiavelli systematically dismantled morality as a political framework, and in its place, he built an understanding that's disturbing, troubling, but in many places brutally accurate. Let me tell you a story that perfectly captures Machiavelli's philosophy. This is the story of Cesare Borgia. Borgia was the illegitimate son of Pope Alexander VI. Yes, his father was the Pope. And with papal backing, Borgia was carving out his own territory in Italy. In 1502, Borgia conquered a city called Cesena. Then he immediately moved on, more cities to conquer, more enemies to crush. But he left behind his right-hand man to govern, a brutal enforcer named Ramiro de Orco. Borgia gave de Orco simple instructions: bring order to this city, establish control, do whatever you need to do, be as ruthless as necessary, as cruel as necessary, as horrific as required. And de Orco executed those orders with terrifying efficiency. He beheaded people in front of their families, seized property without due process. Anyone who opposed his rule got castrated, literally emasculated as public punishment. For months, this brutal order continued. Then Borgia returned to Cesena, and he realized, obviously, that the citizens now hated de Orco with burning passion, and by extension, they hated him. Why wouldn't they? De Orco had spent months killing fathers, castrating brothers, terrorizing families. So one night, Borgia sent his men. They cut de Orco's body in half at the waist, 2 pieces. They also severed his head, 3 parts total. Then they displayed all 3 pieces on a pike in the town's main square. The next morning, when citizens woke up and walked outside, they saw this spectacle: de Orco's mutilated corpse on public display. And because they'd hated de Orco, they celebrated. Borgia emerged and addressed the crowd. He said de Orco had seized power unauthorized. He claimed de Orco had been acting independently. "I never authorized these atrocities," Borgia declared. De Orco was a savage, a sadistic psychopath, and I have saved you from this monster. This level of cruelty, I cannot allow it in my civilized society. This was Cesare Borgia, ruthless, calculating, a double cross of his own closest lieutenant. And you know what Machiavelli says about this story? He praises Borgia. Throughout The Prince, Machiavelli presents Cesare Borgia as the ideal leader. Machiavelli says, look at what Borgia accomplished. He had someone else do the dirty work. When people started hating that dirty work, he killed the man who did it. Now the people are happy and Borgia's hands appear clean. This is politics. This is power. And this strategy, this exact playbook, gets used in corporations today. Your boss pressures you to hit impossible targets. Do whatever it takes, just get the numbers. And when things go wrong, when clients complain or regulations get violated, you become the scapegoat. The boss expresses shock, claims ignorance, and walks away clean. Ramiro de Orco was just a glorified middle manager who got thrown under the bus by his CEO. Classic corporate politics, 15th century style. Machiavelli believed being good is fine, admirable even. but you cannot stay consistently good and be an effective leader. For Machiavelli, politics was a never-ending knife fight. In this arena, ruthlessness becomes necessary. He says a leader cannot always be compassionate, cannot always be loyal, cannot always be humane, cannot always be honest. Because leadership's very nature requires that sometimes you'll need to be cruel, disloyal, inhumane, and dishonest. Machiavelli asks a famous question in his book. What's better, to be loved or to be feared? And his answer is chillingly pragmatic. He says, ideally, you'd be both. People love you and fear you. But these two rarely coexist. And if you must choose one, it's safer to be feared than loved. Why? Machiavelli says people are unreliable. Some are cowards. Some lie. Some can be bought. Some just change their minds based on circumstances. This will happen no matter how much people claim to love you. But fear? Fear is permanent. Punishment is tangible and real. It keeps people in line consistently. You cannot control whether people love you. That's their choice. But fear? Fear you can absolutely control. Now take this out of politics and think about your own life, your own school experience. Remember that strict teacher whose classroom had pin-drop silence? The one everyone was terrified of? And remember that friendly, easygoing teacher whose classroom was complete chaos? Kids talking, laughing, ignoring assignments. Which class actually learned something? Which students performed better on tests? Machiavelli's observation is bitter. But if you think about it honestly, isn't fear actually one of the strongest forms of respect? But Machiavelli adds something crucial here. He says, yes, fear is useful, but a leader must never be hated. Hatred leads to assassinations, conspiracies, revolts. If you must use violence or cruelty, do it swiftly and decisively. One brutal stroke. Don't drag it out. Don't make people suffer slowly, because prolonged suffering breeds the deep hatred that ends with a knife in your back. Take love when you can get it. Use fear when love isn't available. But never, ever allow hatred to grow. But how do you stay on that razor-thin line? How do you commit the necessary sins without the world ever seeing you as a monster? The answer lies in the most disturbing part of the game, the art of the mask. And more importantly, how do you control the beast that lives inside you without letting it swallow you whole? In part 2, we are going deeper into the Forbidden Vault. We'll reveal the secret of the beast inside every human and a mysterious connection to an ancient mind from the East that knew these secrets 1,800 years before Machiavelli was even born. The game is about to get much more personal. Are you ready to see the face behind the mask? I'll see you in part 2.